Welcome to Stories for Wonderful Children, the podcast where I share the recordings of bedtime stories I've told my children. I'm Dan Wendelin, your host and storyteller. Today's story is from June of 2008, and it involves a very unusual candy bar by the name of Twee. Now, Twee has 3 unusual things about it. What are they? You'll just have to listen and find out. Enjoy the story.
Once upon a time there was a candy bar, and this candy bar had on the inside of it hazelnuts and sort of a crunchy wafer, and was covered on the outside with a thick layer of dark chocolate. There were 3 unusual things about this candy bar. The first was that it had legs.
Huh?
It is probably the only candy bar that I know of in the entire world that has legs. It had 6 legs.
6?
Yes.
What in the...
It had 6 legs.
And how many arms did it have?
It didn't have any arms, it just had 6 legs.
So
The second
it had 4
unusual-
feet and 1 and 2 arms.
The second unusual
It
thing...
didn't have arms.
The second unusual thing about this candy bar was that it had a name.
Huh?
Now, you may say, Daddy, all candy bars have names. But you see, those are just the names on the wrappers. They're not a name for that individual candy bar. This candy bar knew its name. Its name was Twee.
Twee?
I really can't say how it came to have legs and a name when no other candy bars did. But it
What
did.
was the third thing?
The third thing about this candy bar that was unusual, no one discovered until the day someone bought it. It was bought by a man who was in the grocery store, and it was 6 o'clock, and he had to work late, and he had no food in his refrigerator because he had not gotten to go shopping that weekend, and so he had to go to the grocery store to get food so he could cook himself dinner when he got home. But by the time he had gone up and down the aisles and picked out just the right apples and just right bananas and the mangoes that were starting to turn yellow and orange and the grapes that weren't squishy and the bread that was fresh and the milk that wasn't overdated and the meat that was just the right weight and the cereal for the next day and the packet of cheese that looked yummiest and the jar of pickles, and then he had gone back because he had forgotten the ranch dressing, and he had forgotten the chopped tomatoes, and he had forgotten spaghetti, and then he was finally in line, and he realized that he had not bought a light bulb to replace the one that had gone out on his front porch, and so he had to get out of line and go all the way back to get the light bulb, and by the time he had finished all of that, it was quite late, and he was very hungry, and his tummy was hungry and growling and rumbly. And so, while he was in line, he looked over at all the candy bars that were there next to the line, and he reached out his hand and he bought 2. One of them was a Hershey's bar, and the other one was Twee.
What was his rapper's name?
What was the name on the wrapper?
Yeah.
I really don't know. It
Then-
was probably...
Then why didn't you think about it?
Okay, well, I'll think about it. The man paid for his groceries, and they all got bagged up. And the man took his bags, and he went out to the car. He put the bags in the back seat, and he took the 2 candy bars out because he was so hungry by now that he intended to eat them on the way home. And so he unwrapped the Hershey's bar, and as he was driving out of the parking lot, he ate it up, quick as a wink. Chomp, chomp, chomp. Didn't even really take much time to enjoy it. And then as he turned out of the grocery store parking lot and began the drive towards home, he began to, with one hand, unwrap Twee. Well, as he had finished unwrapping Twee and was getting ready to take a bite, the third unusual thing about Twee was discovered, and that was that Twee did not want to be eaten. Twee stuck its legs out and scurried right down the man's arm, inside his sleeve, down the front of his shirt, out the bottom of his shirt, and into the back seat. And the man was so surprised, he almost wrecked the car. Twee, once it was safely in the back seat, climbed up and hid in the bottom of one of the grocery bags. The man pulled over to the side of the road and looked. He looked inside his shirt, he looked in the back seat, and then, with shaking hands, he decided he must have somehow imagined the whole thing, or there must have been a giant spider inside the candy bar wrapper that had carried his candy bar off. And so he had put the car back in gear and driven the rest of the way home. When they had gotten home, he had taken the bags in and put them on his kitchen counter, and he had started to boil water for spaghetti. He was going to make himself some cheesy noodles, because he really didn't want to take time to make anything longer, and he began to cut the mango. As he took the things out of the bags, Twee ran from one package to another, trying to find a safe way out. But it could not, and when the man lifted the last thing out of the bag, there Twee sat in the corner, not moving, trying not to be noticed, while the man saw the candy bar, and he looked down at it. Twee had wrapped its legs under itself so that the man could not see them, and so it looked for all the world just like an ordinary candy bar again. The man looked carefully, then he kind of shook the bag a little bit to see if the candy bar would move. Twee didn't move. The man dumped the bag over on the side to see if Twee would move. The man sighed. He decided he must have been imagining the whole candy bar with legs thing. And so he reached his hand into the bag and zip! Twee sprouted legs and ran right up his arm, and the man went, ah! And Twee ran down his back and down his leg and hid underneath the dining room table. The man got out a broom. He was going to whack whatever that was running off with his candy bar. He tried to whack the candy bar, but it was too fast for him. And he stopped, and he looked. He got all the way down on his belly, and he looked to see if there was something underneath the candy bar, and he realized that it was the candy bar itself that had legs. Shaking his head and muttering to himself, he went back to his spaghetti that had finished cooking, drained the water out, sprinkled the cheese over it, and mixed it around until the noodles were all cheesy. And then he sat down at the table with his sliced mango and his cheesy noodles and a big glass of milk, and had some dinner. The whole time he would periodically look underneath the table, shake his head, and mutter to himself. He said, "Well, you're quite something, aren't you?" Twee didn't really know what to do. It didn't have ears. It didn't understand what the man was saying. It was, after all, just a candy bar with legs. But it did know one thing. It was a candy bar with legs that did not want to be eaten. So the man finished eating, and after he had finished eating, he sat there and he looked at the candy bar on the floor for a minute. Then he went into his room, his bedroom, and he came back out with a shoebox that he put over Twee and closed the lid. And Twee spent a long, dark night in the shoebox, wondering what was going to happen next. The next day, Twee felt the shoebox lifted and heard the slam of a car door, and then the roar of an engine, and the man drove the car off. Twee ran from one side of the shoebox to the other and jumped up against the lid, but the man had either put something heavy on top of it or had rubber banded it shut. Soon the car stopped, and Twee felt the box moving. Then they heard voices. The man opened the box, and another man peeked in and saw the candy bar running from one side of the box to the other. The man said, "Yep, I'll buy that." And he gave the man who had bought Twee originally some money. Twee, you will be happy to know, was not eaten. Instead, Twee was placed in a big glass enclosure that was full of other candy bars. And then the fair started. Twee was in a glass container on the fairway of the fair, and people could pay 25 cents to come in and watch the amazing candy bar with legs running from one side of its little glass enclosure to the other. And Twee was very happy there, because it was, after all, just a candy bar, and it was the only candy bar in the world with legs, and the only candy bar in the world that did not want to be eaten. And so, it never was.
Thanks for listening to Stories for Wonderful Children. I created today's story, but questions and witty commentary were supplied by my children. The music was created by Brandon Thompson. Your reviews and personal recommendations are the main way that new listeners find the show, so thank you for spreading the word. I'd love to hear your feedback, so feel free to get in touch via email or social media, which are listed in the show notes. Until next time, I'm Dan Wendelin, reminding you to tell someone you love a story.